In this video, we're going to talk through if you should pay off your mortgage. My name is Alex Seebakken. I am a CFP, and I get this question from clients all of the time on if they should pay off their mortgage or if they should keep it. So let's get into it. The first thing that I get from clients all of the time is they say to me, Alex, my mortgage rate, let's say it's like 6%, okay? You can see here. And then they say, okay, in the market, it returns 8%. And so if everything goes according to plan, we can see here, this is the blue line, is it says, hey, this is market returns. It gives me 8%. Paying off the mortgage, that only gives me 6%. 6% is lower than 8%. Let's not pay it off. The issue with this thinking, though, is, and as you can see over the long period of time, this does make sense. 8% is greater than 6%. But the issue with this thinking is that it doesn't consider market risk, okay? Basically, what I'm saying is, well, markets don't perform in a nice straight line. What happens if markets take a dive? And let's say, for example, in the middle of it, markets take a dive by 20%, okay? Now, what we can see is, okay, markets did well. Obviously, markets don't perform in a straight line for everything, but this is just for examples here to make it easier to understand, is the markets dipped, okay? And by 20%, but you still owe that mortgage, okay? So, and then they recover over time. But the question is, can you handle that volatility in the short term? Also matters when the crash happens, okay? And also the severity of the crash, okay? And it's not always, it could be 30%. We could look at, what happens if it crashes earlier. Then it really looks bad. We should have probably paid off the mortgage. So comparing these two interest rates, comparing market returns versus your mortgage rate, that's a horrible idea because you're not comparing apples to apples. But it doesn't mean that we can't make the comparison. We just have to do it with a different type of investment. Okay, and that moves us into our next section, which is rate comparison, okay? What I want to show you is, let's go back to here. Let's say our mortgage rate is 6%, same thing. And then you say, Alex, I have a 8% market return, okay? Okay, we just explained how this is not a fair comparison. What we need to do is we need to break it down basically into two elements, okay? And we say, here is the part that's risk-free, okay? What is the actual, if I were to go into the market with my money today and I wanted a risk-free or near risk-free investment, okay? So think of if we're thinking of treasury bills or maybe a high yield savings account in an FDIC insured account or something like that. A very risk, it's not taking on risk, it's not fluctuating in value significantly, nearly risk-free. That is the rate that we should compare it to, not the entire market, because the entire market, you're earning an additional risk premium. So let's get rid of the risk premium. We're going to do that now. So now, T-bills, let's just say, or the high yield savings account, let's say it's at 4%, okay? Now we're looking at 4%. Okay, so we're going to make 4% and we're paying 6%. It doesn't make sense to pay off our mortgage in that case. However, let's say our mortgage was, 2%, maybe we got it during COVID, or we refinanced at a great year. Then yes, even if we keep the mortgage and even if we pay it off, if we keep the mortgage and we go invest even in a risk-free investment and we're not taking on volatility, we're still earning extra money without taking on additional risk, okay? So that's what I kind of want to get you into the thinking of, is let's compare actually apples to apples, not comparing a risky investment to basically a risk-free investment, which is what your mortgage is, okay? Let's now move into the tax effects. Okay, so we understand the difference between comparing the two rates. Let's go into tax effects. So the first thing I want to talk about is let's say our mortgage is let's say our mortgage is 3.5%. Okay, and then let's say our our T-bills, our high yield savings account is 4%. You might be saying, okay, I'm going to earn 4% and I'm going to pay 3.5%. Okay, so I'm earning 4, paying 3.5. That sounds like a good deal to me. The one issue with that, though, is we also have to think about, and you're like, okay, well, I'm paying 3.5, I'm earning 4, and I'm not taking on any additional risk. I should keep the mortgage, right? One thing that I want you to also keep in mind is taxes. Specifically, one side of the equation is after tax returns, not just your gross returns, okay? So net returns. And that's what we're going to show you right here is it says, okay, let's say you pay 20%. Let's say your marginal rate is 20%. For every dollar of interest that you're making, this is a very simplified assumption right now to say 20%, but let's just say 20%. You can adjust this if you want. 20% of 4%. Okay, that's 0.8%. So net, so we're talking about 4% is gross, take away 0.8% for taxes, we get 3.2%. Very simplified math, but you get the idea. So net returns, we're making 3.2 and we're paying 3.5. Does it make sense? We have to take one more thing into consideration here, okay? The other thing that we want to take into consideration is your deduction. People tell me all the time, Alex, I get a mortgage interest deduction, that's why I want to keep it. Well, honestly, it's kind of overrated, the mortgage interest deduction, because of a couple of reasons. Number one, most people standardize. If you standardize your deductions, you do not get a deduction for your mortgage interest. Okay, so I have this turned off, which means I don't get any discount or anything like that. How we can think, you only get the tax benefit if you itemize. And even if you itemize, you still may not even be get the whole benefit. But in this video, I'm not going to go over that because it's a little bit more detailed into the video. So I want to show you this is if we click on this and we start itemizing, we do get a deduction and we get to basically think of it like we get to trim our rate a little bit. I know we're still paying the same amount to the bank, but think of it as like a little bit of a refund from the IRS in that sense. So let's say 3.5. So we take 3.5% and 3.5%, that's a deduction. We're going to times it by a marginal rate again. So 3.5 times the 2, okay, the 20%. And then that gives us this little sliver of a deduction here, okay? So then our net, basically our effective mortgage, think of it like 2.8%, okay? So with the deduction and taking in the taxes, the additional taxes we pay because of our additional investments, then we're looking at 2.8%. Okay, I'm paying 2.8% net, and I'm earning 3.2% net. Okay, now it makes sense, okay? So just walk through this and think about this when you're making this decision, is also to consider taxes not on just one end, but both ends of the equation. Okay, wrapping up here with everything kind of all put together in one, is we learn that if your mortgage rate, we'll start with this one, if your effective mortgage rate is less than your after-tax risk-free return, nearly no matter what, it makes sense to keep the mortgage, because even if you go invest in nearly a risk-free asset, even with considering taxes, you're still going to net out ahead. So it makes sense to keep the mortgage. This typically for most individuals, this makes sense if they have a 2% mortgage or a 3% mortgage. that they maybe got during COVID or another time, and they're just locked in at that very low rate. It makes sense no matter what. Keep it. Whether you don't need to take on additional risk, and you can still beat that rate. For if your mortgage rate is greater than your after-tax risk-free return, it doesn't immediately mean let's pay it off, but it is saying maybe consider paying it off. And if you're not going to pay it off, just acknowledge that in order to beat your mortgage rate, you're going to have to invest in a riskier asset. So you're taking on more risk by keeping the mortgage and investing what you could have used to pay off the mortgage. So one thing I want to also note is the catch is this only works if you actually invest the difference. If the money sits in your bank account and you don't actually use it, or it's not optimized, then it may make sense to just pay off as much as you can instead of letting it sit in your bank that's maybe only earning like 0% or 1%. So now that we talked about that, I want to talk about you can do this yourself. I'm going to link this whole entire file. You have access to all of it. Just go to this tab for decision rule, run your own numbers, and figure out for yourself where you kind of stand. So I'm going to run in, let's say I have a 3%, let's say I have a 4% mortgage, and my risk-free return. The risk-free return, I'm just going to keep at 4%. And my marginal tax rate is 22. After tax return is, we see here, my after tax return. So I can, I make 4, my after tax return is 3.12. Do you itemize? And you can just click here, yes or no. So I'm going to say I do itemize. Or actually, I'm going to change it to I don't. So your effective mortgage rate, 4%. No deduction is higher than your after-tax return of 3.12%. So what it's recommending is pay it off or invest knowing you're taking on risk to beat that gap. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.